What I am trying to do with my draft strategy is, that's the start of the essay in SpongeBob about boating school. What I learned in boating school is, anyway.
You're listening to Let's Talk Fantasy Football, where men of fantasy genius have realized, hey guys, we don't need real football skills to dominate on the fantasy field. Yeah. So slap on your pads and grab your helmet. Shit's about to get real.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Let's Talk Fantasy Football. I'm your host tonight. My name is Nick Walsh, and I am here by myself tonight. And I am here by myself due to a variety of circumstances, but what I would like to emphasize here is that Let's Talk Fantasy Football is back. I know it's been a little while since you guys heard a podcast from us. We were going through the divisions at a pretty, steady pace. That sort of fell off for a variety of reasons. As you guys know, I've mentioned it before. This is a labor of love for us. We all do work day jobs. We all do have other things going on in our lives, but we're cooking on all cylinders from here through the rest of the season. And we did miss out on a couple divisions at the end. I do promise you guys I will have those done as solo recorded podcasts to get you all caught up on what happened in those divisions and where you want to be going. But today we have a plethora of things to talk about. We are back in NFL training camp, which is, a wonderful thing. And really there's a ton of things that have happened and that we need to go through that have happened since we sort of left off. Before I really jump into everything, would like to mention that the reason Fearless Leader Nick Schreck is not with me today is because Fearless Leader Nick Schreck is a brand new father. So I'm recording this on the 14th of August, and Schreck did have his baby girl a couple days ago. So that is why he was unable to join me for tonight. So congratulations to our Fearless Leader Nick Schreck. Schreck, we love you. We're very happy for you. And yeah, that's all I can really say there. We were also going to have the return of the DON tonight, but he is having internet issues. And you know what? Sometimes the world just doesn't want you to have the return of the DON. So we'll have to put that off for another time. That being said, I think I'm just going to jump right into sort of the news that we've had going on. And we are, I wish there was more, but we are starting to get sort of a trickle of news out of training camp, and not just like this guy is in the best shape of his life or this guy, came into camp 10 pounds lighter and because of that we should all draft him. But things like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is running with the first team offense and is the feature back in practice. And things like that are really actionable, things that aren't just some reporter's opinion, but are actually what's happening on a field, even if it is a practice field. Because the first piece of news that I wanted to talk about tonight is that there's officially no preseason. So, some people look at preseason as useless. In past years, if you've been a long time listener, each year I will talk about in this preseason game or over these preseason games, what receivers, what running backs, what tight ends got snaps with the starting quarterback and with the first team offense, with the first team offensive line. And I think that can be a huge indicator of how teams intend to use players. Now, it's the NFL, so those things can change over a couple weeks, but it really is, a key into what the coaches are thinking and who they would like to have out there and what sort of formations they would like to have out there. So, for example, we had this news nugget that came out of an interview with Raiders offensive coordinator Greg Olsen. And it was, it basically said Henry Ruggs is going to start in the slot, and then we're going to try and move him all over the place. And people were like, well, I guess Henry Ruggs is a starting slot receiver. Hunter Renfro's out of here. What he was really saying was that he thinks he can line Henry Ruggs up in a lot of places. He thinks they can use him in the slot. I think he would be great in the slot, personally. I'd be very excited if that's how they're going to line up. But that's the type of thing where in previous seasons, Greg Olsen would have said that, and then throughout the first 3 preseason games with Derek Carr on the field, we could have looked at the snap counts and said, okay, during this time, Henry Ruggs lined up in the slot 45% of the time. He was on the outside 50% of the time. And then for the other 5% of snaps with the first team offense, he wasn't on the field. And then we actually have some sort of information. We don't have that information this year other than what they're doing in practice. So that's why you're probably going to hear me and the rest of the guys lean on this practice information a lot harder than we would have in past years, because we're just trying to do the best that we can with the information that we have. And this year, the practice information is going to pretty much be the best that we have. So we're really not getting as much of an insight into offenses as we would have in years past, which is a huge bummer. But again, understandable that there's no preseason. Just as an aside before we get too far, part of the reason that I haven't been recording and that sort of thing has been it's been hard to get up for the NFL season. It's been hard to convince myself that there will be a season. I think at this point there will. I am still very worried about a situation where one player on a team tests positive and then all of a sudden 10 players on a team test positive. What do you do there? How does that affect fantasy? And we're going to talk about these things. We've already talked about in our main league that all of us play in, what we should be doing in terms of COVID reserve spots, what kind of exceptions we can make this year to make it more equitable. But it's been tough. It's been tough to convince yourself and to convince myself that an NFL season and a good NFL season is going to happen, particularly with other sports doing a good job, but not doing what the NFL is. Like the PGA, for example, just a completely different beast. I've really enjoyed the golf season so far. I think it's been a ton of fun, and I think they've done a great job. The NBA has done a great job, but they are obviously in the bubble. So, that's sort of just what you can do. Baseball, I don't think, has done a great job, and they're not shutting the season down. But when you have the Marlins playing with practice players and that kind of thing, it changes the competitive balance. That's what I'm sort of afraid of with the NFL. Just as a general thing, I will be cutting down my season-long volume this year. I normally play in 6 to 10 leagues. I'm getting rid of like the work league or the league with your friends and their girlfriends, like that kind of thing. Like I'm cutting that out because it's not going to be fun for anyone. The big money leagues that I'm in, the ones with, with my close friends, the ones that I would say are important leagues, those I'm going to stick with, but I'm definitely cutting down on my season-long volume, and I will be playing a lot of DFS this year. So, let me know what you guys think in terms of whether you would like more DFS analysis, whether you'd prefer to stick to the season-long kind of stuff like we normally do with just a touch of DFS stuff thrown in there, not really anything like too actionable. And we'll kind of go forward from there. But yeah, that's sort of a peek into what I'm thinking about in terms of not having a preseason and then in terms of the season itself. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm going to take periodic breaks to take a sip of beer. If you've listened to the solo cast before, you know how this goes. I've got a double IPA, Further Through the Haze by Bear Republic. Pretty good. Didn't realize it was a double when I bought it. It gets you pretty toasty pretty quick. But anyway, back to the news. I figured I'd start with, on the theme of it is COVID season. And by COVID season, I mean the NFL season that deals with COVID. Praying to God there is not more than one where we have to deal with COVID. But I figured I'd start with the major opt-outs. So guys who opted out of the season, the deadline has already passed to opt out. I had thought that Tre'Davious White had opted out. It turns out he hadn't. He just thought about it and tweeted about it. But anyway, we'll get into the major opt-outs here and kind of use that as jumping off points for some other conversations. And we're going to start with the Miami Dolphins, where both Albert Wilson and Allen Hurns have opted out for the season. So this is significant because Wilson, I think you could pretty much project as the starting slot receiver, as well as a guy who might be involved on special teams as a returner. And Hurns, I think, without Wilson, I think Hurns would probably be the slot receiver. So now we've got sort of a combination between just a gigantic cast of guys, Jakeem Grant, Isaiah Ford, Matt Collins, Ricardo Lewis, Chester Rogers recently signed, and then the rookie out of Navy, Malcolm Perry. They're all guys who you might see jump into the slot. Obviously, with Devontae Parker and Preston Williams, we anticipate starting on the outside. But we'll sort of see how it plays out. I don't think any of this is going to be terribly fantasy relevant. I do hope Jakeem Grant gets the role because he's a guy who can break big plays. He's a guy who can kind of change games with no targets or with few targets. And then outside of that, I think another scenario that could play out, and this is probably just me, getting too optimistic in terms of trying to make this fit the narrative of what I want, is you could see Mike Gesicki getting split out in the slot a little bit more. And that would be great because he's a tight end that really, really came into his own towards the end of last year in the second half of the season when their target tree was very abbreviated. It was basically Gesicki and Parker getting all of the targets. And Gesicki became a very startable tight end towards the end of the year with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the helm. So, we'd like to see progression from Gesicki. I think if they use him split out a little bit more into the slot, that could be interesting. I don't know if they're going to. I also think it's very possible because we talked about on the Dolphins preview that Chan Gailey is their new offensive coordinator. And we know that Chan Gailey has historically run a spread offense. So if you're going to go 3 or 4 wide with it spread out, having Gesicki in the slot really makes a lot of sense to me because, he's just an athletic guy who can create mismatches, and he's like 6'7" and fucking gigantic. So you can do a lot of interesting things there, I think, with Mike Gesicki. I think you can do interesting things with like Jakeem Grant. I think, the boring thing that happens is Chester Rogers becomes the slot receiver and, you just have him kind of doing nothing. But it'll be a situation to monitor, I guess, a little bit. And I think another thing that you can maybe do here is bump up Preston Williams and Devontae Parker a little bit because they're losing both of the receivers that we figured would have taken the targets in the slot. So we're going down in talent theoretically in the slot, which means less targets to the slot position, which means potentially more targets to the outside receivers as well as maybe Gesicki. So, I guess adjust your spreadsheets accordingly. That's kind of what I'm doing. And we'll see how it plays out. The next one I want to cover is Jawan James, the offensive tackle for Denver. Now, James missed much of the season last year with an injury, but he was expected to come back and potentially start or at least compete for a starting spot at offensive tackle for Denver, who did not have a great offensive line last year. So, I don't think this is really like something we need to factor in too much because he wasn't in the picture last year either. We can kind of, they didn't really address offensive tackle in the draft. We know that they went nuts in terms of adding skill position players, and we'll see how that affects things. But to me, this isn't really a huge one. I probably could honestly left it off the list. We're going to move. The next couple are also ones that I'm just going to breeze through. Geronimo Allison opted out. He would have been the 4th wide receiver for the Lions. I think the only way he would have potentially become interesting would have been injuries to any one of Galladay, Marvin Jones, or Danny Amendola. Matt LaCosse, the tight end for the New England Patriots. I put him in there because he was the starter for the Patriots for a lot of the year last year. He didn't do anything to really earn additional looks as a starter. The Patriots did not target the tight end. They targeted the tight end the fewest amount of times of any team in the NFL last year, and a lot of that was due to the fact that Matt LaCosse was the leading tight end. I think what that does do maybe is open up the depth chart to really get the playing time that we would hope for rookies Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene, who were both 3rd-round picks in the NFL draft this year, maybe 2nd. God damn it, I don't remember. Anyway, the point is that I think these guys will be seeing the field a lot. I don't think either of them should be drafted because, 1, we don't draft rookie tight ends. It's generally a bad idea. And 2, that offense is just hard to predict in terms of what's going to happen with Cam at the helm, with the wide receiver core as it is, and now with these rookie tight ends projected to be getting most of the run. Sticking with the Patriots, 2 key defensive players opted out. Patrick Chung, the safety, who has really been a stalwart there for a long time, been a very, very good player in that secondary. And then Dante Hightower, their linebacker, who is arguably the best player at his position in the NFL. This is a Patriots defense that already lost Kyle Van Noy and Jamie Collins as well an edge rusher, and another linebacker. So this Patriots defense has quietly taken a huge hit from where they were last year. And you know, it's hard to completely write them off because they were so great last year, and also because they were great due to their secondary. So the secondary is still, outside of losing Chung, which, no offense to Patrick Chung, but I think there are more important people in that secondary than Patrick Chung. The secondary is still more or less intact. So I don't want to write off this Patriots defense, but also I think there's a real possibility that this isn't even like a top 10 defense this year. There was always going to be natural regression because it's really difficult for defenses to put up, these outlier performances like 2019 was for the New England Patriots defense multiple years in a row. We saw how the Bears defense regressed last year. We saw how the Jaguars a couple of years ago, after everyone was calling them the best defense in the league, rightfully so, but we saw how they just kind of naturally regressed last year, or the year after that, rather. This is just something that happens with defense. And, losing 4 veteran stalwarts of your defense, that's huge. It's absolutely crucial. So, I think the Patriots will need to sling the ball around a lot more than they did last year, just out of necessity. And I haven't really processed how that's going to affect my offensive projections, because, again, there are so many moving parts in that offense. There's just so much different that it's going to be really hard to nail down a projection on it. But I do think the Patriots defense is going to be one, not that you go out of your way to attack, but not one that you avoid this year. Maybe you avoid their number 1 wide receiver if Stephon Gilmore is going to be shadowing, but this isn't the elite Patriots defense that we saw last year, and we shouldn't be treating it as such. Moving on to the New York Jets, their division rival, if you want to call it a rival. A rivalry, generally, you need to have both teams, being good, throwing punches, that kind of thing. I guess you would just kind of call this, they play each other twice a year. Sorry, Jets fans. But CJ Mosley opted out. He was hurt a lot of last year, so again, we're not really going to see too much of a change from last year. But CJ Mosley is an excellent pass coverage linebacker. And this is a team that was already going to struggle in pass coverage. They basically have no cornerbacks on the roster. No offense to their guys who are on the roster. It's just, they're not guys who have proven themselves at the NFL level yet. They basically have no cornerbacks on the roster. They traded Jamal Adams a couple weeks ago. That was news that broke probably since our last podcast. Jamal Adams is on the Seahawks. He is no longer a Jet. And now they lose their best coverage linebacker as well in CJ Mosley. This pass defense is going to fucking suck. It's going to be really bad. We should be targeting them for the entire year. They play the Bills week 1. Get ready. John Brown, Steph Diggs, Josh Allen, whatever you got to do there. Stack them all on DraftKings. Do what you got to do. So I think that's going to be easy, and that's something that hasn't changed from last year. We wanted to target the passing games against the Jets. I think the question is going to be, do we want to upgrade the Jets' offense a little bit? Just because it's going to be so easy to score against them that they're going to need to chuck the ball around a little bit. And, offensive line is going to be hard to project this year, but we are projecting the Jets' offensive line to be better than whatever the fuck they put out there last year. Sam Darnold is not going to be coming off of mono this year. I don't know if you ever had mono. I had it when I was in 6th grade. I might have told this story on the podcast before. It's called the kissing disease. I didn't get it from kissing a girl. I got it because a dude that I was friends with let me finish his ham sandwich in lunch. And then a week later, he was like, I have mono. And then I got tested and was like, fuck, I have mono. The point is, I played a baseball season after being pretty good at baseball the year before. I played a baseball season so bad that I quit baseball after having mono. There are lasting effects of that. And I know I was a child and he's a professional athlete, but you don't just come back from mono and it's everything is normal. So I think there's some room to project Sam Darnold, or at least there's some room for us to believe that the upside is there in terms of a guy who will be more efficient, who will play better behind a better offensive line. When he's, said on the field, he was seeing ghosts last year in terms of pass pressure, as well as just him being himself. And he's a guy who the season before, he was absolutely on fire towards the end of the season. He was a guy who was just slinging the pig all over the field. They had that crazy game against the Packers. Robbie Anderson was an every week stud. Robbie Anderson obviously now not on the team. But I'm intrigued by this offense a little bit, and obviously the caveat here and the looming shadow in the background is Adam Gase, who we never know whether to trust. He says he wants to feature Le'Veon Bell more this year. He says he wants to pace up after they have historically, and he has been historically a coach who runs a very slow offense. Not a ton of offensive plays. He says he wants to get up to 65 to 70 offensive plays a game from like the 50 that he was at. I don't know if I can believe him. I don't know if I definitely can't believe that he is going to use these offensive players and these offensive tools to the best of their abilities. But I do believe that they can have a better year than they did last year due to the defense being terrible, the offensive line being a bit better, and Sam Darnold really taking a step forward as a quarterback that we thought maybe was going to happen last year rather. So for those reasons, I would like to espouse Rashad Perryman as a late round target, as well as potentially Jamison Crowder. I have ADPs up here. Let's see. Jamison Crowder currently going in the 11th round of 12-team drafts, wide receiver 47. And then let's see where Perryman's going. Oh, Perryman in the 15th round. Fucking sign me up. All right. Let's move on to the next major opt-out here. Damian Williams, and this is big. This is the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. And actually, before I get into Damian Williams, I do want to mention they had two more key opt-outs. So let's put that on pause for just one moment. Their starting guard from last year, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. I apologize. His name sounds French-Canadian as hell. I don't know if he is French-Canadian. I think he might be. But he opted out. He's a guy who has like a medical degree, and he's opting out in order to treat patients. Pretty admirable. And then Lucas Niang, their third round pick at offensive guard, and potentially the guy who, would have replaced Laurent Duvernay-Tardif if he was playing, also opted out. So, they have a collection of veterans in there. Kelechi Osemele is the name that stood out to me just because he was a former Raider, and he's a guy who's done it at the NFL level for a number of years. So it's not like they're throwing in like a fucking undrafted rookie in order to make this situation right. But look, we like the Chiefs a lot because they were basically bringing back the exact same team. And they were up until this point going to be a team bringing back, I believe, the entire offensive line. So, in a year where we want continuity, this is just a little bit less of continuity. I don't think it's a huge deal, but it is something. Now back to Damian Williams at the running back position. So the Kansas City backfield is now left, and I say left is like not the correct word to use because it's not really a dearth of options here. They have an absolute ton of guys either with some sort of pedigree, some sort of hype, or some sort of history of NFL production. So we're looking at Clive Edwards-Helaire, who I mentioned earlier in the podcast. We're looking at DeAndre Washington, former Oakland Raider, very, very highly rated by Pro Football Focus this past year, and really has been excellent when he's played. He was a guy who gave you a couple starting fantasy weeks last year when Josh Jacobs was hurt. You have Darrell Williams, who has been productive in the past in limited roles. You have Darwin Thompson, who didn't really get on the field last year, but was very hyped going into the year. He's a guy that a lot of people kind of liked coming out of college. And then you also have Elijah McGuire, who has been productive for the New York Jets in the past. So like I said, like we're not dealing with just like no ones here. I think any one of those guys, you throw them on the the Carolina Panthers last year, and they're CMC's immediate backup, as opposed to Reggie Bonifon. Again, no offense to Reggie Bonifon. So I think the question here is, how high do we raise Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I always want to call him Clive. I feel like his name would be smoother if it was Clive. It is Clyde, right? Yeah, it is Clyde. Okay. In my brain, it always wants to be Clive. Clive Edwards-Helaire. That sounds cool. Anyway. How high are we really going to draft him? He's currently, and just for reference, I'm using 4for4's ADPs, which is sort of a composite of a lot of different sources. I've had some troubles finding ADPs that I think are reliable this year, and this is, I think, the best that I can find. So according to their website, he's currently running back 14, 12th pick in the second round. Now in the FFPC, which is the Fantasy Football Players Championship, it's where it hosts a lot of high stakes leagues, basically. A lot of people paying a lot of money to play some fantasy football. So the players are generally pretty sharp. He is currently running back 8 in FFPC ADP. So the sharp players are drafting him higher than in other places, where maybe the news of Damian Williams, it hasn't been, it hasn't, they haven't reacted as quickly to that. And like I mentioned in sort of the lead into the podcast as a whole, a report came out of Chiefs camp today that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is running with the first team. He is running as the quote unquote feature back in practice. I'm skeptical of running back 8. And we'll sort of see, I guess, how it all plays out. Like, he could end up being an incredible fantasy asset because he could end up being the primary running back for the best offense in the NFL in the Kansas City Chiefs. That's an extremely valuable situation to find yourself in. That being said, I just talked about how he has a ton of guys around him. He has still 4 guys in the backfield, either with a history of production when given the opportunity or with some sort of hype around them. And that's what worries me, is that last year we had Damian Williams in this situation where it was like, yeah, like if he gets the job, he's going to be great. And then they signed LaShawn McCoy, and it became difficult to predict week to week what was really going to happen. And it really just becomes a guessing game in that sort of situation. So to me, I do not think I'm going to end up with a ton of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I said Clive again. And I'll get into more of my general strategy at the end of the podcast. We'll kind of close with that, which will sort of explain why. But I cannot see myself taking him ahead of someone like Miles Sanders, who is the running back 9 currently. Josh Jacobs, maybe, Kenyon Drake, maybe, but we're sort of into this tier where everyone has a wart, everyone has a question mark. So I would preach caution with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I would preach letting him maybe get to that initial ADP that we talked about the end of the second round, rather than taking him as the RB8, like the FFPC ADP says. Then again, the sharp people are taking him early. So it's hard to say. I'm going to go against the sharps on this one. I am not going to endorse Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a borderline first, second round pick. Not for me just yet. We'll see if some information comes up. Otherwise, I think DeAndre Washington's good. I think he's a very good running back. I think Darrell Williams looked good when he played. I think Elijah McGuire's been fine when he played. There's just so many things going on there. And I think DeAndre Washington, currently running back 67, love him as a late round target, because there's definitely a situation where he ends up getting between 40 and 60% of the Chiefs running back touches. And that's really, really good. So just give me 1 second, sip of the beer. Actually, maybe, yeah, you know what? We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Have you thought about trying sports betting but aren't sure how it'll go? Our friends at FanDuel are giving away a $50 sign-up bonus at letstalkfantasyfootball.com/FanDuel-sportsbook.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are back and ready to jump into the second half. I apologize. You might be hearing a siren. I apologize if you hear any extra noises in the background. I do have the door in my room open to my back roof area. It's 95 degrees in beautiful San Francisco where I am. It really doesn't get outside of the realm of like between 45 and 75 most of the year. So I do not have air conditioning, and if I shut the back door to my room, I will die while recording this. So I would prefer not to do that. Anyway, let's jump right back into the major player opt-outs, and we'll move to left tackle for the New York Giants. That's Nate Solder. They will now likely be starting third-round rookie Matt Pert, who is sort of like, he's a guy who I think most people expected to start as a guard in the NFL and then maybe kick out to tackle in the future. It seems like he's just going to be, thrown into the fire, protecting Daniel Jones's blind side. Just general opinions on the Giants. This isn't good for Daniel Jones. It's not good for him or any of his pass catchers. But the more that I've thought about it over the offseason, and I don't think we've actually done the NFC East, so I will, be talking about this in a division preview. But regardless of whether Nate Solder is protecting the blind side or not, the Giants hired Jason Garrett as their fucking offensive coordinator. That is so puzzling to me after, just years of him seemingly doing the wrong thing with the Cowboys. But, the NFL is a clique. It's one big fraternity. And I'm sorry, I can't think of the Giants GM name now. Is it Dave Gettleman? Is that my boy? Gonna do a quick Google. Dave Gettleman? Yeah, it is. Okay. Dave Gettleman is one of those examples of those people. So, I think a lot of people were kind of high on Daniel Jones and maybe the Giants pass catchers early in the offseason. I've sort of landed around the area where if I'm not getting Saquon, I'm not really targeting anyone on the Giants team. And Saquon I'm targeting as much as I possibly can, because if we know anything about Jason Garrett, it's that he loved feeding the ball to Zeke. So, hit me with that Saquon, and I will stay away from the rest. Nate Solder being out doesn't exactly help the cause either. Moving to Green Bay, Devin Funchess has opted out. He was, a very low-risk signing, but appeared to be a signing made for him to come in and be the number 2 wide receiver across from Devontae Adams. It now appears that Allen Lazard is sort of unchallenged going into that role, becomes the unquestioned wide receiver 2. And he's a guy that has shown chemistry with Rodgers, has had flashes, and most importantly, a guy who has been publicly complimented by Aaron Rodgers, which we all know that Aaron Rodgers either likes you or he doesn't like you, and that can really make or break you as a Green Bay wide receiver. And Allen Lazard is in the he likes him category. So, he's an interesting guy. The Packers appear to be moving towards an offense where they are going to try to slow down and control the ball with the run game. All of their sort of moves and coaching comments and that sort of thing point in that direction. So I don't know how much value Allen Lazard has as the number 2 wide receiver. If you had said that 3 years ago, like Aaron Rodgers, number 2 wide receiver, does not have a ton of value in fantasy, people would look at you with their mouths agape. But that's no longer the case. It is a brand new world in 2020 with good old Matt LaFleur and good old Jordan Love standing on the sideline with a clipboard. Anyway, Lazard's got the upside of the Green Bay wide receiver too, whatever that means. Moving on to Philadelphia, Marquise Goodwin opted out. And Goodwin was, I forget if he was a trade or a signing. If he was a trade, it was like a 7th-round pick. But look, the Eagles have deficiencies at wide receiver, and this isn't new. Greg Ward, who was actually mentioned by Doug Peterson as someone who could be in the rotation to start again this year, and in his defense was very, very good down the stretch with Carson Wentz. But the Eagles having wide receiver issues is not a new thing. And going into this year, Alshon Jeffrey is likely to begin the season on the sideline. Marquise Goodwin is now out. So you would think their 1 and 2 are going to be Deshaun Jackson and, who has a pretty significant injury history, and first-round pick Jalen Reagor, who I think has a ton of upside. And I am just going to take a look at his ADP and make a comment on that. 12th round wide receiver 50, Jalen Reagor. Another one of those where you can count on me to end up with some Jalen Reagor if he stays at that price. Going after Sterling Shepard, going after Mike Williams. I do like Mike Williams. Jamison Crowder. Mecole Hardman, are you kidding me? Mecole Hardman. I am not on the Mecole Hardman hype train this year. I know it's could potentially bite me in the ass, but going after Henry Ruggs. Interesting. All right. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting too caught up in ADPs. The point of this is that there's some opportunity in this Eagles pass catching core. I was looking for some reason the word quorum came to mind. I think that technically applies, but I don't know if it's really the word that I was looking for. But the Eagles drafted to have a ton of deep threats because in the past their deep threats have gotten hurt. And this is going back to when Mike Wallace came in and got hurt. And then Deshaun Jackson came in and got hurt. So now you have Deshaun Jackson, you have Jalen Reagor, who's a great deep threat. They drafted John Hightower, who is very fast as well in the later rounds. So Marquise Goodwin was sort of like extra deep threat depth. And I don't think this is going to kill them. And it might open up some more opportunities for some young guys to maybe get a look at the field. So keep an eye, not draft, but like keep an eye on like the John Hightowers of the world and actively draft the Jalen Reagors of the world, who could end up being the number 1 wide receiver for the Eagles, by week 2 if Deshaun Jackson gets hurt. So keep it in mind. All right, we are going to close out the major opt-outs with 2 defensive tackles. The first one for Buffalo, Star Lotulelei, who opted out and was expected to be a starting defensive tackle for Buffalo this year. Now, I kind of always thought of him as pretty good. Part of it might be he was drafted in the draft that Shrek Rogers and I went to. And I thought the Raiders might have, been looking at Star Lotulelei as an early draft pick. Turns out he was PFF's 90th ranked interior defender out of 118 ranked defenders. So that's pretty bad. Injuries might be involved in some sort of ways there, but I get the feeling that Buffalo isn't going to miss him too much. However, Eddie Goldman, the starting defensive tackle for the Bears, was ranked 35th out of 118 interior defenders, and I do think they will miss him a little bit more. I talked in depth on the Bears preview about how I thought their defense was really not going to be that great this year, that this was not the Bears defense that we've seen of past years and how you should be hammering the Bears under. I don't think this does anything to change that. In other Bears news, they said that they anticipate, or maybe it was just a reporter, but they anticipate Trubisky being the week 1 quarterback, which is just, I get it given the circumstances, but just mind blowing to me that this is still going to happen. All right, let's move on to a couple quick signings and then talk about maybe impacts and some sort of tertiary situations going on from there. I don't know if I used tertiary correctly. Anyway, this was just today or maybe yesterday. The Patriots signed Lamar Miller. Now, Lamar Miller tore his ACL last August. He's 29 years old, coming off an ACL tear. But we've been hearing these reports recently that Sony Michel is may not make it week 1. He has a foot injury. He is still on the PUP list. Up until today, that was basically a drumbeat for Damian Harris stepping up, elevating into that Sony Michel role. Maybe Damian Harris being a guy that you could look at in drafts. But now Lamar Miller is also in town. And more than really make Lamar Miller interesting, I think this just kind of dampens Damian Harris's stock. And Sony Michel still being drafted where he is just bizarre to me because, he wasn't that good last year. I don't know. Am I missing something where a guy averages less than 4 yards per carry, he's a 0 in the pass game. And I mean, it's not like he's getting drafted really high. He's RB 38, 8th pick in the 9th round. But like, I don't know. I just have zero interest in exploring Sony Michel at any cost this year. James White is going around earlier, and he should be going significantly further ahead of Sony Michel. And then you have Damian Harris. And, these are obviously going to change over the next couple of weeks. But Damian Harris currently RB 58 in the 17th round. Even with the Lamar Miller signing, I think that's more than fair for a price for a guy who might elevate into the Sony Michel role, given Michel is hurt. And Lamar Miller, we haven't seen since he tore his ACL. And even before that, like, it was Lamar Miller. It wasn't anything crazy. So interested. I'm interested in Damian Harris, obviously at the low price. I'm interested in James White, where he is. We'll see if Cam, as a more mature quarterback, decides to use the running back a little bit more. The last time we saw Cam, for the beginning of his career, he really did not target the running back very much. But the last time we saw him, he was targeting Christian McCaffrey pretty heavily. So, color me intrigued on White and Harris. Color me out on Michel and on Miller. Not that Miller's going at all. Another veteran running back signing that potentially clouds a running back situation, and it was a running back situation that was already fucking clouded. So the Bucs signed LaShawn McCoy, and now Bruce Arians still says that Rojo, Ronald Jones, is going to be his lead back, and is going to be the guy banging with the football on first and second down. I have a tough time making heads or tails of this. Ronald Jones is going running back 30, 9th pick in the 8th round. Keyshawn Vaughn, running back 42, 6th pick in the 10th round. And then LaShawn McCoy, running back 55, 8th pick in the 16th round. I think it's tough to really nail what any of these guys are going to do, because you look at Rojo, one of the worst rookie years of all time for a running back, drafted by the regime before Bruce Arians, so no real loyalty in that sense, was pretty good last year. But even after he started getting pretty good, would still occasionally do something dumb, miss an assignment or whatever, and cede carries to Peyton fucking Barber. So take that for what it's worth. You've got Keyshawn Vaughn, who is a good prospect, but not an overwhelming prospect, and a guy who a lot of people, I think, expected the Bucs to address this position with someone more high name, more hyped up than Keyshawn Vaughn. And then you have Shady, who is an older running back. Was sort of healthy scratched for the playoffs with the Chiefs last year, but also was used at certain points, and we know has a history of being a guy who can block in the pass game and catch passes and run when given the chance and this whole thing. So, and then you've still got Dare Ogunbowale back there, who played on a third of the snaps last year, despite not really getting any actual getting the ball in his hands really very much, and is also the running back who Tom Brady has had at his Tom Brady offseason workouts. So, there's that narrative to go as well. So I think there's a lot of weird things going on there. Dare Ogunbowale is undrafted at the current moment. I don't think I mentioned that. If I did, I apologize for repeating myself. And the other thing, I think, with Arians saying, oh yeah, Rojo is still going to be the lead back, you can count on him to be in there on first and second down, whatever. It wasn't too long ago that Bruce Arians had an electric rookie who was scoring a touchdown every time he got the ball in his hands. And instead of just giving him the ball 25 times a game, he was giving a bunch of carries to Chris Johnson. And of course, I'm talking about David Johnson in Arizona. But I don't trust Arians to bring in Shady just as roster fodder, just as camp depth. I mean, Shady's a guy with a history, and he's a guy who Arians probably thinks he can trust in a way that maybe he can't trust Ronald Jones or Keyshawn Vaughn or even Dare Ogunbowale. So, I have a hard time really thinking that I should target any of these guys. Yeah, it's just again, like I would take the cheapest one. I'd take Shady in like the last round or whatever. Rojo in the 8th doesn't seem like a bad price either, because again, like who are you really going to take ahead of him? I guess James White would be like, I would take James White ahead of Rojo, who is currently going 2 running backs behind him. So you're splitting hairs a little bit there, but it's just a bizarre situation, and one that I think sometimes the best move is to just stay away. And I think this might be one of those situations where the best move is just stay away. Don't get caught up in this nonsense. Don't get caught up in starting Ronald Jones the week after he scores 2 touchdowns and he gets, 7 carries for 21 yards and 1 target and no catches. Like just avoid it. Just keep yourself away from all of that. So that's kind of where I'm at. We'll see if things change that opinion going forward, but that's where I stand at the current moment in time. The last signing that I wanted to get to, or it's 2 signings for the same team. It's not really huge deals. The big signing for this team was George Kittle getting the contract extension, but the 49ers signed J.J. Nelson and Tavon Austin. And I don't bring that up because I think you should be rushing out to draft J.J. Nelson and or Tavon Austin. I bring it up because it seems to confirm that Deebo Samuel is going to miss some time this year. Deebo is out, and I should have had his injury written down. I don't have it. I apologize. I'm going to look it up right now. But Deebo Samuel has been dealing with injuries this offseason, and he's not a given to really play early in the season or really play at all this season. So here we go. Broken foot. Yeah. John Lynch's last quote about it was, quote, "It's fair to say he might miss some games at the beginning of the year," end quote. There's opportunity for other guys to step up. I don't think it's going to be either J.J. Nelson or Tavon Austin. We do have Brandon Ayuk, who is their first-round draft pick. He is currently going off the board at wide receiver 62, 15.02 in 12-team leagues. And you still have Deebo getting drafted as wide receiver 35, first pick in the 8th round. And you know what? I can't blame you for doing that if it's just going to be 3 or 4 games. Because Deebo balls. He's a really, really good wide receiver. And when he does come back, if he comes back healthy, you would think he just kind of picks up where he left off at the end of his rookie year. Now, I do think there's some opportunity with other guys who were already on that roster to maybe pick up some looks. A guy like Kendrick Bourne, I think, is a very interesting candidate to be an early season fantasy contributor. And I think the guys who are maybe higher upside than Kendrick Bourne, but sort of less likely, where you've got Jalen Hurd, the 2019 third-round pick who missed the entire season with injury after catching 2 touchdowns in a preseason game last year, and then Trent Taylor, who is a slot receiver who was also out with injury last year. And ironically, Trent Taylor did have a Jones fracture last year. That is what Deebo Samuel has in his foot this year. Taylor was a guy who we thought we were going to get back at some point during the year, and he ended up just not playing at all. So, Deebo is a complete uncertainty at this point. If you're taking him in the 8th round, a guy who could be somewhere from 3rd to 5th round talent, sure, I think you can do that. You're taking a risk, definitely. But if I were to choose someone who is going to be the benefactor of Deebo Samuel being out, I'm skeptical on Ayuk because I'm skeptical on rookies coming into this year. Ayuk's going to get opportunities, but even going back to last year, it took Deebo till the second half of the year to really develop into what he became. Ayuk, I think, might have a slow start to the year. I think Kittle, is a guy who you could see additional targets go his way. We know just how good he is. Obviously a guy who you should be targeting in all drafts, a guy who I will be targeting in all drafts. I'm just looking up his ADP currently going off the board, 9th pick in the 2nd round, tight end number 2. I will take George Kittle at the end of the 2nd round. I might even take him early in the 2nd round. Particularly with the target volume sort of being narrowed with Debo being out. But yeah, I think Kendrick Bourne is really my guy who I would be targeting late round, who never seems to be very flashy, but always seems to be a guy who they trust and a guy who can contribute. So that's my current stand is going to be Kendrick Bourne, and I'm just currently undrafted, so it's not like you have to spend much capital on him as it is. All right, I think that's going to do it for the news. I'm going to dive into my preferred draft strategy, and if you listened to some of the previews, I sort of alluded to it and mentioned it a couple times, but it really hasn't changed. I think right now what I am looking to do with my draft strategy, this is a terrible time for me to want to take a sip of beer, but we're going to do it. What I am trying to do with my draft strategy is, that's the start of the essay in SpongeBob about boating school. What I learned in boating school is, anyway, hope you got that reference. If you didn't, then fuck you or something. I am looking particularly early, if I have an early first round pick, to take one of the elite running backs. And then I am looking to not draft a running back for a while. I am looking to get a guy who is a bell cow and who I know is a bell cow. And I'll go through the list of guys that I think I would put into this category. Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Zeke, Kamara. Kamara's bell cow status is a little up in the air, but the Saints are going to be so good and he's so well used and he's not hurt this year. But I think it doesn't matter. Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry we're sort of getting out of here. And then sort of on the border, Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb. I will throw Miles Sanders on that border as well. And to me, that's where it ends. But if I can get my hands on one of McCaffrey, Barkley, Elliott, Kamara, or Dalvin Cook, I'm doing it. I am doing it in a heartbeat. I am not drafting Michael Thomas over any of them. I am not even thinking about anything else. That is my pick. If I cannot, I'm looking at wide receivers. Maybe I'm taking, this is all going to evolve, but maybe I'm taking Devontae Adams. Maybe I'm taking Derrick Henry. Maybe I'm taking Joe Mixon. Maybe I'm taking Tyreek Hill, Nick Chubb. I don't know. We'll kind of see how that all shakes out. But I think if you are able to do that, then to me, running back becomes very scary very quickly. And by that, I mean there are a lot of guys with a lot of upside. And there are some guys that I like in this second to fifth or sixth round range. There are definitely some guys that I think could be very good. Melvin Gordon, I like this year. Chris Carson, I always like. A guy like James Conner, I think, could be an interesting pick. But these are guys that you're spending a lot of capital on that I think all have pretty significant downsides as well as their upsides. Fuck Leonard Fournette. Do not take Leonard Fournette. And I don't know if I want to do that when I've got so many wide receivers on the board that I really, really like. So within that second to sixth or fifth round range, I think I'm trying to load up on wide receivers and potentially one of the top tight ends, the Kelsey, the Kittle, maybe a Zach Ertz. As we keep getting word of these wide receivers dropping, I think Zach Ertz may continue his double digit target type of weeks, and in which case he becomes very viable as well. But I am trying to get in on one of these elite tight ends if I can, preferably Kittle. Just because he's a baller and he's fun to watch and I like rooting for him. And also he's extremely good. And I mentioned that I think his target share might go up this year. So anyway, going through that, I think what I'm doing rounds 6 or 7 through 10 or around there is just loading up on running backs. And these are all guys who I think have upside, have the kind of upside where they could be every week contributors, but also have some sort of standalone value. So you're looking at a Kareem Hunt, or you're looking at a Cam Akers maybe for the Rams. You're looking at J.K. Dobbins, Ronald Jones, who we talked about before, James White. You're looking at these types of guys who you can take these swings on. Man, Marlon Mack is going so late. Frank Reich literally just said he's the starting running back for the Colts. Guy's not going until the 8th round. So there's a lot of guys in this range that I think have upside. And by drafting them, you are not saying that I think this guy will succeed. What you are doing is putting another arrow in your quiver of running backs who might succeed. And all you need to do after you've gotten that elite one at the top, barring injury or something very, very unforeseen happening, all you need to do is hit on one or two of these like 4 to 5 guys that you're going to take in this range. And I think that seems extremely plausible. Like, it's bad luck, I think, to not hit on at least one of them. So it's, that's sort of where I'm looking there. And then obviously after that, we're looking at drafting 1 to 2 quarterbacks, depending on your preference, depending on how easy it is to stream in your league. Make sure to take a look at early schedule. If you're drafting 2, also take a look at schedules. See if both guys have bad early schedules, then maybe think about other people. In that range, I'm also just, taking random wide receiver and running back depth that I think I might need. Or if I missed out on tight end with one of the elite guys, I've pretty much skipped the range where I would be taking a middling tight end and, like the Darren Wallers to sort of, well, let me pull up the actual ADPs. The Darren Wallers to like the Tyler Higbees or Jared Cooks of the world. And for me, I'm trying to take, 1 or preferably 2 if I've got the roster space of these high upside guys who also have some risk involved with them. So getting 2 of like Mike Gesicki and Blake Jarwin or Eric Ebron, Dallas Goedert, Jack Doyle, Jonnu Smith, like a Noah Fant, like these types of guys. So that's sort of where I'm at. Now, if I miss out on one of those elite running backs, I think at that point, I'm making decisions based on who's available where I'm picking. So if I like a running back at a value within the 2nd to 5th or 6th rounds, I will take them. If you miss out on an elite guy, you're going to have to do a little bit more of padding behind them, right? So if you take a wide receiver at the end of the 1st round, maybe you end up taking a running back at the beginning of the 2nd. Maybe you end up taking, a Nick Chubb or a Clyde Edwards-Helaire or a Josh Jacobs or that kind of thing, Aaron Jones. These guys who I mentioned have warts. But again, you do need to have running backs. I just think with that elite one, that buys you a cushion of having throwing darts later on. So there's, depending on draft position, I think that does a lot of it. Depending on what you get in your 1st round, that also changes a lot of things as well. I'm trying to think if there are any other major points that I want to go over. Oh, so let's say I end up taking a wide receiver late in the 1st round or maybe mid 1st round. I get to the 2nd round and Travis Kelce is on the board. Yeah, fucking take that guy. That's a situation where you can take the certainty that you get, the relative certainty that you get from Travis Kelce, and you can deal with loading up on running backs, in like the 3rd through the 6th. That's another thing. It's okay to just take a dickload of running backs in a row or a dickload of wide receivers in a row. If you think you are weak at one position at a certain point in the draft, throw yourself some darts. Throw yourself some darts over the next couple rounds, and hopefully one of them hits. If not, you got unlucky, and there's always the waiver wire. So that's sort of where I'm at this point in the off season. If you have any questions on that or anything that I said, really, please feel free to reach out to me. I have no idea how long I went, but hopefully this wasn't too shitty. And yeah, like I said, we'll be back with more of these strategy, news, ADP type podcasts. I am also going to finish up the division previews in a more abbreviated manner. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, LTFF is back. We're going full steam ahead. If football's going, then we're going. So for Let's Talk Fantasy Football, my name is Nick Walsh. Later, podcast.
This has been Let's Talk Fantasy Football. Thanks for listening.